So moving on to the next story is the NetUSB driver flaw, and I think Manny, you had looked at this one,
yeah,
right?
So obviously this is another a new vulnerability dubbed the CVE 2015-3036. It's basically found in the NetUSB component, and it's basically, they're saying, affecting possibly millions and millions
Lots of different vendors, right?
Yes, routers and embedded devices. So we were just talking about, Internet of Things. These could potentially have this NetUSB component as part of some of these other devices, not just routers. So what it basically is, it's another buffer overflow. It's a kernel stack buffer overflow. It's in the Taiwan-based K-Codes NetUSB, and I guess for those who don't know, if you ever looked at your home router, right, you probably noticed at one point that there is a USB port.
Right. Some of them do, right?
Some of them do, right?
More recent routers have like USB ports on them to hook up.
Plug your printer in, and then all of a sudden now you have
now
a
it's network enabled, and everybody can get to it on your local network.
Exactly.
Is the idea.
Right, exactly. That's the way it's supposed to work. But yeah, and so many people probably end up using them for plugging in external drives.
Right.
So now it's accessible by anybody who's on that network. So very convenient, obviously. So much so that we'll find out also that it's so convenient that they actually turn this stuff on by default. So, so there's
even if you don't have anything plugged into it.
Correct. Right. That's the problem. So it's again, there is it's limited to a certain set of vendors out there, but there is quite a few. As you'll see from the website, there's quite a lengthy list of
a lot of vendor
vendors.
names that you'd recognize. They all use this K-Codes NetUSB, I guess, library or code base as part of their router firmware or whatever.
Right. So just real quickly, it's basically triggered when a client sends the computer name over TCP port 20,005, longer than 64 characters, to a server on that device, right?
So on the local area network.
Correct.
If I can locally hit that router from the local network.
Right, and then basically it's going to overflow the actual computer name kernel stack buffer. And then basically once that happens, you're now able to run arbitrary code on it.
Game over.
And you can DOS the device.
Or probably do some remote code execution. Maybe do some additional things.
Absolutely.
If you know what target device you're targeting.
Yeah, and then obviously to make matters even worse, the really bad stuff is that the NetUSB service code, it actually runs in the kernel mode. So once a hacker is able to exploit, their malicious code can run at the kernel level.
Right.
So, and like you said before, it's on by default. So these routers that actually have the USB port, you'll find out that they're actually have this turned on by default. And some of them have no way to turn it off, which is a problem. And then as of when I read through this article, the only manufacturer TP-Link was the only one so far that has actually provided a patch or a fix for it.
Okay. All right. Well, it'll probably take a little while for all the vendors to integrate that into their products, because they have to get notified and understand how this vulnerability works.
Right. Yep.
And as Brian is always pointing out, these are the kinds of devices that, since they don't automatically update themselves, the user at home has to know that they need to update the firmware. So this could linger for a while, but it's also another example of just what you were talking about a little bit ago, John, where the lack of bounds checking in the folks' code. They assume, since the computer name should only be 64 characters, that it'll get truncated someplace else. So.
Yeah, how could somebody possibly have a computer name that's longer than 64 characters, right?
Go figure. I guess that's what the developers were thinking,
That's
right?
exactly what they were thinking.
So, John, in this CVE, I looked into it, and they include some proof of concept code
Oh, yeah?
for an exploit. They say they're holding back the actual exploit that they've developed, but they put basically some pseudocode for an exploit. Is that something that is standard? I mean, it seems a little dangerous to me that we're publishing something that a hacker could take and use to exploit a vulnerability that's pretty new, that maybe hasn't even entered the wild yet.
Well, I mean, explaining kind of at a high level how it works, I don't know if that's necessarily so bad. I think it's good that they held back the actual exploit code. They probably gave that to the vendors like K-Codes and some of the other vendors, because you want them to understand and be able to replicate the problem, right? But yeah, I wouldn't be an advocate of releasing vulnerabilities widespread.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to make it too easy. But the problem is there's a lot of smart people out there, right?
Yeah.
They're probably going to figure it out before the vendors get this fixed.
Yeah, there's already enough information that's been released for the wheels to start turning.
Yeah, and that's not unusual. You've got a lot of very good lateral thinkers in the security realm out there who can see something like this and say, oh, I know where this probably is in the code branch, and I can figure out what they're talking about here. For the most part, this is locally exploitable only. They did mention in the article that there might be a few vendors that are exposing this NetUSB on the internet WAN side, but they didn't identify which ones or that it was, in any kind of widespread kind of issue. And I guess the other point I wanted to point out was Jim said, a lot of people who have these devices, they need to be made aware that this is a problem and that they need to patch, but everybody's watching ThreatTraq, so now they're informed, right?
That's right.
Everybody watches the show. Yeah. I'm just kidding, obviously. Okay.
And plus, it doesn't have a fancy nickname or,
Right, yeah. This is a very boring, and this is, well, we're going to get into this in the next story. If you named every vulnerability CVE 2015-3036, the media would not care at all about this vulnerability. But when you call it logjam or shell shock, everybody goes, oh, what does that mean? They all get nervous, right?